You ready? 6 o'clock? All right. If everybody will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call the January 26, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the City of Milton Planning Commission, and I am Sumit Shah, Chairperson. This is a 7-member commission appointed by the City of Milton Mayor and City Council, created for the purpose of holding public hearings and making recommendations on rezoning, use permits, concurrent variance applications, comprehensive land use plan and plan map, and other related plans, and amendments to the zoning ordinance. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our board members and welcome all of our new board members. So we have Fred Edwards, Judy Birds, Kurt Nolte, again Sumit Shah, Ron Gilbert, Stephanie Butler, and Laura Weisong. The petitions will be heard in the sequence listed on the posted agenda. I would like to acquaint you with some of the rules and procedures conducting this meeting. The applicant and all those speaking in support of an application will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present the petition. The applicant may choose to save some of the time for rebuttal following the presentation by the opposition. The opposition will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present its position. If time remains, the opposition will be allowed to rebut. Since the burden of proof is upon the applicant will be allowed to make closing remarks provided time remains with the allotted time. The staff of the Community Development Department will be keeping track of time and will inform you periodically of the remaining time for your presentation. Each speaker must fill out a speaker card before speaking and leave it with a staff member of the Community Development Department. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable, before beginning their presentation. When an opponent of a rezoning action has made within 2 years immediately preceding the filing of the rezoning action being opposed, campaign contributions aggregating $250 or more to a local government official of the local government which will consider the application, it shall be the duty of the opponent to file a disclosure with the governing authority of the respective local government at least 5 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting. A violation of the relevant state statute constitutes a misdemeanor. Therefore, if you have contributed $250 or more to a council member and you have not filed a disclosure prior to the Planning Commission meeting, the city attorney strongly suggests that you have someone else speak for your point of view. Each application has been properly filed with the Department of Community Development. Signs have been posted on each site. The matter has been advertised and the notices have been mailed to property owners affected by the zoning as required by the Milton zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission's recommendation will be forwarded to the City of Milton Mayor and City Council for final disposition in approximately 5 weeks on the first Monday of each month at 6 p.m. in the council chambers. The Community Development Department has reviewed each application in conjunction with various agencies and departments, both internal and external to the city. Staff's recommendations, findings, and conclusions are here before us in written form, which has been made available to all petitioners and to the public. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, dialogue with the person speaking, or outbursts. Please turn off all cell phones or place them on silent. All remarks will be addressed by the Planning Commission. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you will expect to receive yourself. In addition, the applicant shall not submit material to the Planning Commission during the meeting unless requested to do so by the Commission. All material that you wish to be reviewed by the Commission in consideration of your application should be submitted to the staff of the Community Development Department to be included in the normal distribution of packages to the Commission. Finally, to the applicant, if your petition is deferred in accordance with the Milton zoning ordinance, that you are required to update or obtain a new sign for reposting. Failure to update or repost will result in further delay. There are no exceptions. The Planning Commission is tasked by the city's subdivision ordinance to conduct a public hearing on proposed preliminary plats that have been found to be complete by the Community Development Department. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission is required to review the proposed preliminary plat and provide comments and make recommendations regarding the plat to the Community Development Director. The Planning Commission does not approve or reject the proposed preliminary plat, but merely provides comments or recommendations based on the public hearing and the Planning Commission's review of the proposed preliminary plat. At this point, I would like to call for any general public comment.
There are none.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is the election of officers.
Okay, so I guess I can lead that. So, and if the city attorney can help me if I mess up, I appreciate that. So I'd like to have a call for nominations for a chairperson. Any nominations for a chairperson?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Kurt Nolte.
Okay.
I'd like to second that.
We have a first and a second. Any other comments or anything else? Okay, guess we can, you all can have a vote on that. So all in favor? Aye. Okay, so 7 and unanimously. Okay, great. So the next item is to call for nominations for a vice chairperson.
Nominate Ron Gilbert.
I second.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Any more discussion? Okay. We can have a vote on it. So all in favor?
Aye.
Great. Sounds great. So we have some new officers.
Just real quick, just confirm that was a 770.
7070. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So now we have Mr. Kurt Nolte as our chairperson. So that's awesome. And then Mr. Ron Gilbert as vice chairperson. So anyway, thank you so much. And we can hand it over to our new chairperson.
Well, thank you. And
Chairperson.
I just want to say, you're excited about the upcoming year. I think the new members are adding an awful lot when it comes to perspectives and experience and dedication. I mean, Laura on the design review board and your interest in the Highway 9 area, I think is valuable. Stephanie, I appreciate your background on the design review board. I'm sorry, you're on the board of zoning appeals. And I appreciate your attention to details. We found out today or yesterday with the preliminary plot. That was excellent. So thank you. And our whole job here is to make Milton a better place to live. And I believe we can learn a lot from each other. Also, as everybody here knows, I promise to carefully follow the comprehensive land use plan. I think we all know the thousands of person hours that have gone into this, along with the hundreds of hours that the residents of Milton have put into this, saying this is our vision. But I think that's something that we need to listen to carefully, and all our decisions should be focused around that. Because again, that's the strongest word we've had from the citizens of what they want. I would also like to challenge all of us to look for ways that we can be, a better resource to the city and to council in, again, the whole goal of making Milton the best place we can make it. I would like to thank Sabina. You did a great job this last year as chair, also vice chair of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee. I did a great job with that. So thank you. I'd also like to, thank staff. You guys do a great job. You guys do all the heavy lifting, and we really appreciate it. And I want to keep those lines of communication open and transparent as much as possible. So with that, I just like to say thank you. Thank the other commissioners for their trust in me. And again, I'm looking forward to this year, learning from each other, and again, working hard for the city. So thank you guys. So with that, are there any motions on the agenda? Is the agenda, we need to move, are we going to move something up or?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'll go ahead and make that motion. See, they here? No, okay. My understanding is that the applicant for the preliminary plat is actually going to be here a little bit later. So I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we move the preliminary plat item number 6 down past the Planning Commission training meeting of the agenda.
Second. Okay, so we've got a motion by Commissioner Samit and seconded by Commissioner Judy or Birds, whichever, Miss Birds. Yeah, any discussion on that? Any comments? Okay, you've heard what? All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That was unanimous, 7-0. Move the planning commission training up. All right. The next item on this is, we had public comment, there was no public comment, correct? So then we go to the approval of the action minutes. These are things that were printed out first today, and I think Robin sent them out yesterday. How does that work? 'Cause, you know, 3 of the current commissioners weren't here for those. Do they vote on that? How does that work? I'm not sure.
Typically, they would abstain,
Okay.
and the remaining members would vote.
Okay. Do I have a motion on the minutes from the last meeting?
Hold on. But we accept the action minute. Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Fred and seconded by Ron. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Abstain.
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 Okay, so we've got 4 yeses. Oh, okay, and then we've got the 3 new members abstaining for obvious reasons.
Can I make a request that we never have a motion like we did in the last?
Come on, that was fun to craft. I mean,
I'm just being funny, but not really.
those 4 paragraph motions.
Well, no, I just got the end of it, so I'm sorry. What the end result was, I was like pulling my hair out, like, and she could hear me like swearing under my breath, so.
Want the job after 6 minutes on this. Didn't care to be. We had a problem of, what do? You turned it down, now do we start over? Oh, then he don't want it.
Right.
That went on for a while.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No,
I
no,
digress.
no problem. So next on the agenda is the planning commission training.
Good evening, everyone. I've appeared before you occasionally, this time in a formal capacity here to provide what is a training session, and I will acknowledge that this is presented based on kind of a form set of guidance and advice that I provide to many of the boards and commissions that I sit on. However, at any time, if you have any questions or issues that are of particular interest to you, please feel free to let me know. I will do my best to answer them now. If I need to go back and look something up or find a section or get you a response separately, I will certainly do that. And I'll also remain open to do that at any time outside of meetings as well. If you have a specific question about the process, I'm always open to respond to any of you individually. I do represent the commission, but I do want to make sure everybody's proceeding comfortably and in a manner that works best for the operations of the council or the commission. That said, I've pulled from the bylaws what is listed as the member duties when you come here, and these are some basic things that I believe one time in the various boards and commissions that I've represented here, that there was a question where a member couldn't make or didn't make the required number of meetings, but the code and the bylaws actually require attendance at 2/3 of the meetings in a calendar year. So starting with this month in January, obviously everyone's here. We're off to a roaring start, but you would need to attend 8 meetings during the year. There's no automatic impact of that, but it would give rise to the ability of a removal for a violation of this particular obligation. I've never seen it happen. And typically there will be, if there's even close to anything, there'll be an explanation and it won't result in an impact, but putting it out there. The second item is to share all materials received with respect to any application. And in short, if you receive information from an applicant, the idea is to get it to staff so that it can be circulated. Sometimes an individual district will see their post member or their district representative and forward it just to them. The obligation, that's implying the obligation to provide that information so everybody has a full packet of information on which to base their decisions. The bylaws suggest and require that you not discuss applications outside of public meetings. The idea is to be as open as possible so that the public that could be watching or is in the audience here will see all of the same information that you see. The packets are published online. And it's the concept to be as open as possible. Yeah.
Does that include in the past, they've asked that we go out to the site, to look at that site, as long as there's only 3 of us? Form, is that acceptable?
It is. And the idea is not to engage in the discussion with the applicant. If the applicant is the property owner, they meet you on site to show you around. The idea is just more to get a gauge of the site and see. In many cases with rezonings, it's going to be potentially raw land that's going to get subdivided perhaps, or zonings. I mean, you don't necessarily need to do much more than kind of get a visual of it. So yeah, limited contact, but yes, go out there and to be clear, for purpose, and I didn't cover open meetings necessarily in this presentation. I sometimes do have a whole section on it, but the reference to, for those, just to make sure it's clear, the Open Meetings Act says that every meeting of this council, the Planning Commission, needs to be compliant with the Open Meetings Law, which means there needs to be a notice of the meeting and it's published. And so that way the public is able to attend and see what is happening at the meeting. Now, that means that if y'all happen to meet even out in the hallway, 4 of you standing outside huddled together talking about something, the public could say, oh, is that where the secret action really happens? So we do ask that that sort of gathering is minimized. Now, technically, the Open Meetings Act actually says no business shall be conducted at a meeting. So theoretically, you could have those sort of discussions, but in order to avoid any question or the public concern, say, hey, I saw them out there, and filing a suit to allege a violation. And someone can allege a violation and make a claim, and then we go through a lawsuit and there's depositions and we say, no, we were only talking about this, that, or the other thing, but it had nothing to do with running any business of this commission. It just saves a little time if you're conscious of it, which is why, yes, we ask that not 4, 5, 6, 7 of you all go out at the same time and travel across the site. So that's the purpose behind that request. And then the last duty that is of particular note that's referenced is to recuse in the event of a conflict of interest. And I do have some reference to that later on the materials, but the most basic, obvious thing is if your property that you own or have an interest in comes before the council or this commission for a rezoning or a use permit, you would obviously ask that you recuse for consideration of that item. It gets there's potential for, is it in my neighborhood? Is it something that I own shares in, something I'm interested in? And if there's ever a question, please feel free to reach out to me to say, hey, this came up. Is this a conflict? Do I need to recuse? I won't necessarily make that decision for you, but we can provide advice to you if you have any questions about that. I pulled from the city's code what they officially state as the role of the Planning Commission. And it's stated, as you see, charged with upholding the policies of the city comprehensive plan when reviewing zonings or rezonings, use permits, concurrent variances, and changes to the city zoning ordinance and associated map. So there's a number of tasks that might appear before you, and that's listed in that section. From that, I've broken down where that general statement, you can see where some of those obligations, and basically it's holding the public hearings associated with those particular items that were mentioned before. So you can see rezonings, concurrent variances, text amendments, use permits. You will see preliminary plats, which is what you'll see tonight. Now, it's a little different process, so we'll talk about the different standards and the different role you play with respect to those. And then also, while similar to use permits, there's also reference to cell tower permits. I don't know that those come up very often, but there are hearings associated with those as well. Attached, this is found actually in the city's code, the zoning procedures. And you can see, if you look down, right about here is where the planning commission is located. So you can see there's a lot that goes on that's more than just what this planning commission does. But your role is down near the end of it, and it's not an unimportant role. While, as you will hear, that you just make recommendations to the city council on all of these applications that come before you. That is not something that should be taken lightly. The city council has everything within the city that is a possible issue that they will deal with. You are tasked specifically with the land use related items, and you're put on this commission with the intention being that you will have specific focus and will be able to provide that focus in your recommendations going to the city council. So while you are only a recommending body, and it's good to make sure that is put before the public in the opening to acknowledge that it is an important role that you have, and the city council can take or not take your recommendations and act on them, but it is with the specific guidance that you are focused only on these issues and have the ability to provide a little more focus than they might otherwise have. Now, I know that the city council is very active and engaged in these type of things and will not unilaterally just take the recommendation and rubber stamp it going forward, but your input is desired as part of the process. I've listed some of the information about public hearings. There is a Georgia law called the Zoning Procedures Law that establishes standards that every jurisdiction, minimum standards that each jurisdiction has to comply. The idea being that the public should know about and have the opportunity to engage in a discussion of zoning decisions that take place. So in order to do that, there are minimum requirements about advertisements. There are minimum requirements about how they get to interact during the hearing. Those are the principal ideas. The city has adopted rules and procedures by which they will go forward with their notice and hearings and we have reviewed them and are comfortable that they meet those minimum requirements. But the idea is you'll sometimes hear maybe did the sign get posted? As most of you probably are aware, the city requires, and the zoning procedures law also requires, that a sign gets posted on the property that's being up for rezoning or for a use permit. That's in order to let people traveling know that this property, it may have more information than this, but the idea that as a practical matter, it'll say there's something going on this property. You probably want to go to the city and look into it if you're concerned about what happens on this property. Now, there's certain information that has to be on there, and we require it as well. But the idea is it gets notice out there. It's also published in the paper, and the staff sends out letters to neighboring property owners. And then there are also minimum requirements when the public attends the public hearing and what is required. The basic understanding that probably for you to need is both sides get equal time. The applicant and those in favor get an equal time to those that are speaking in opposition. The minimum requirement is 10 minutes which is consistent with what our bylaws say. That can be extended. The base, if we don't go any further with any action by this commission at each public hearing, 10 minutes for, 10 minutes against. If at some point in time you get to the point where there's, the applicant's got more time, needs to present some additional information, or there's, 30 people in opposition and you want to give everybody some time, then the appropriate manner of doing that would be at a point in time where it becomes clear a motion is made to extend the time. It would be extended time for both sides. No matter what you do, both sides should get equivalent extensions for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you think necessary. If you know it's going to be a significantly participative hearing, you may do that up front. You may say, we'll just go ahead and start with 20 minutes. We know that it's going to take 20 minutes each side. We'll start before the hearing starts, but you would need to make a motion to do that. Motion, second, discussion, vote. But again, that can be done repeatedly. Sometimes it's like, you do it for 2 minutes and they thought they could finish it up in 1 minute, but they take 2. And then the next person needs 5, and the next person needs 3. You can do it that way. You just kind of see how it goes. Okay, yeah, it's a good time. I will shift into a little bit more substantive matters after we get this applicant out.
The next item up is the preliminary plat, 14,000 New Providence Road by Octave Built New Providence LLC, zoned AG1 to subdivide 11.492 acres into 5 single-family lots at a density of 0.35 units per acre.
Good evening, Commissioners, and welcome to our new members. My name is Tracy Wilds. I'm the Land Development Manager here in the Community Development Department. I have worked with many of you, and I'm very excited to work with our new members. Tonight, our first preliminary plat of the year is Whisper Woods at Milton. It is located, as Robin mentioned, at 14,000 New Providence Road, and it's actually in the northwest quadrant of the New Providence Road Birmingham Highway roundabout. The site is 11.492 acres. It is undeveloped, and the proposal is to subdivide the property into 5 single-family lots, which creates a density of 0.44 lots per acre. This site plan on your screen identifies the 5 single-family lots. Lot sizes range from 1.2 acres to 2.70 acres with a separate detention area on its own lot for stormwater. These 5 lots will be accessed by a private elongated loop road. It will be divided in the middle with a green lawn. The mail kiosk is proposed to be located in that area. This site plan is also showing, it's a little hard to see, but it will have a sidewalk connection from the entrance drive back down to the existing sidewalk along Birmingham Highway. We maintain the rural view shed all along New Providence Road and Birmingham Highway, and the property contains a 10-foot no-access easement around the perimeter, excluding the detention area. There will be availability to access that detention area for maintenance and repairs. The applicant has provided a tree survey. I've actually got pictures of the site to coincide with the tree survey. The site at one time was cleared, a portion of the site closest to New Providence and Birmingham roundabout. And so we've got images here looking from New Providence Road to the east, our view from the roundabout looking north, and then a west view from Birmingham Road itself. All of the information and plats that the applicant has provided has been reviewed by staff. and it does meet all of our codes. I do have the applicant here for any questions, so I'll be happy to bring him up now and welcome any of your questions or discussions or concerns.
Do you have a presentation or just for questions and answers from us?
Yeah, I think just questions,
Okay.
unless, Paul, you would like to say anything additional?
Not really. I mean, we're pleased to work with the county staff on developing this property. And we're ready to go. So the moment we get approval, we'll start working it.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
With respect to the curb cut to the detention pond, I noticed there is an existing curb cut there on Birmingham Highway. Is that the same location or are you moving that curb
It's the
cut?
same location.
Yeah, I have a question for the applicant. Can you tell me looking on the plat, between lot 1 and 2 on the driveway and lot 5, 4, and 5, what's the footage between those two driveways, between those two lots?
It shows closer than it will be. We think it's going to be about 20 to 25 feet from edge of driveway to the other edge of the driveway.
Okay, yeah, because it looks like you're in the 25-foot buffer. Is that what I'm seeing? Okay. And then one other question. So I'm looking at lot 3 and lot 2. I'm not seeing, well, I'm looking for kind of land study here. What's the terrain on the back of those lots? Can you tell me? So are they sloping? I mean, I've driven by here a ton of times, but hard to see with a lot of trees. Trying to understand what the slope is off lot 3 and then on lot 2.
Well, the natural ground slopes towards the detention pond area.
Okay,
That's the general
okay.
grade.
And then what about 2? Where does that one slope? Let's say behind the house where you see on that lot where it comes to a corner. What's the terrain off the back of that lot?
Which corner are you talking about, man?
On the back, so the driveway, if I were to go straight back from the driveway and from the house,
Okay.
what's the terrain situation back
It's
there?
sloping towards lot 3. And lot 1 is going to be a house on a slab. Lot 2 will have, it yields itself to a basement, and it will be a house with a basement.
Okay,
And the
And-
basement will be towards lot 3.
okay, and what about lot 3? Does that one also have basement?
Same thing, we'll have a basement towards the detention pond.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Detention pond, what is the construction?
It's an earthen retention pond.
Deep?
If you look at the grade lines, it's probably look about 8 feet, maybe 6 feet deep. But we're still assessing that in light. We're going to do a revised hydrology study that supports the final grade of the slope.
So they haven't engineered it yet, totally. So, I mean, this is an approximation, but obviously everything would have to meet the rules and regulations of the city and the state for,
If it is 8 feet.
it is, yeah, 8 feet would end up
Absolutely.
having, and we require equestrian style fencing around the detention or stormwater facility. And then, as he stated, it would be earthen berms. We don't permit any walled structures within the stormwater facility, so.
Anybody else? Oh, I just have a question on the fire truck turn template. The way I read that, a fire truck would have to make 6 different back and forths to get around that. Is that, do I read that correctly?
We've conducted an auto-turn study, and the fire truck can turn without doing any back and forth.
Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure what those vectors were coming off of that. I don't know if it
And we
was,
presented that to the fire chief, and he approved it.
okay, well. All right.
I mean, the ladies in here kept us straight. I mean, we can get away with anything, believe me.
I agree. We have a very good staff. So, and we do not vote on.
So we do have some public comments.
Okay, great. I'm sorry.
So the first person who wants to make a comment is Charles Griffin.
Good evening, guys. My name is Charles Griffin. I live at 545 Glen National Drive in Providence, Atlanta National. May I use the? there's- Help to illustrate. Okay, so Providence, Atlanta National is the neighborhood that exists currently right here. And I have a couple of questions, some of which were answered just by simply looking at this. I was curious as to where the curb cut was going to be. If there were any changes that were going to be necessary to the traffic circle. It does not appear that that's the case. However, there does, Lot 5 here in particular, but also Lot 1, exists below grade to this detention facility. And there currently exists a stormwater runoff pipe that runs underneath New Providence Road and into Providence Atlanta National Community Association, and eventually drains into our detention facility. And so my question is the developer aware of this pipe? What measures is the developer taking to ensure that the impervious surfaces that are going to be put in, et cetera, don't create additional runoff into this pipe, additional sediment into this pipe that eventually runs into Providence Atlanta National's detention facility, which is a lake, which the community association is obliged to dredge every 20 years or so. And it seems to me that in order to get runoff back into this detention facility from Lot 5, there would need to be a substantial amount of earth moving that would need to happen in order to shift the grade there. Alternatively, I imagine something can be worked out to accommodate the additional runoff, either in an isolated fashion or between our two communities. But I just wanted to ask of the developer what thought and what planning has gone into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the impervious area is mainly the driveway in here, the elongated driveway. And there will be a catch basin at this point that will drain any water caught in this area towards the detention pond in a most likely 18-inch concrete pipe or something like that. So that's probably the highest or the largest surface area of impervious fill in the development. We're not changing the natural grounds in here for Lot 4 and Lot 5. So surface water will continue to drain as naturally as possible.
So it will continue to drain south on Providence Road or spot by stormwater pipe that's like southern border block. Providence Road. Providence National. Essentially, Providence Atlanta.
I'm not sure if that will be the case, honestly.
I've got photographs if you'd like.
I'm not sure. I mean, if you allow us to run the hydrology study, we'll be in a position, really better position to answer your question. I can't really right now tell you how it's cut.
And I would like to add, yes, the next step would be to do a land disturbance permit where they'll provide a full set of civil drawings where we will be able to evaluate that topo. And his engineer, again, will do all of the volume work.
And you take your comment into consideration. I mean, it's a good point, and we
Yes.
need to address it.
It is.
I've got photographs, let me see them of what the type looks like. I think it's,
In here?
the existing, you know where the existing guardrail is?
Yeah,
The traffic circle?
right,
It's somewhere along that guardrail.
okay. And it's crossing under New Providence Road
Under New Providence Road. and
towards Europe.
into one of my neighbor's backyard. That runs into a catch basin on Rationale, which drains into the lake.
Okay,
So we will, when we get to LDPC, we'll want to make sure that that information shows up on the plans that are submitted.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, because it does look like there's almost a 20-foot increase from the front of the lot to where the catch basin is going to be at the end of the private drive. So, you know, I think that's a great idea. Let's be sure we look at that.
But according to the measurements, 1040, lot 5. The other side, it's 80. So
Yeah, we'll make sure that everybody's aware of it, and it'll have to be, I mean, that's just part of the process is the LDP, and that our stormwater engineer will evaluate what their engineer does, and then we'll definitely share that information to make sure that they're aware of it. So it's just the process.
And it's worth noting that we have implemented at the beginning of the year, because we just adopted it, that now developments will be required to do runoff reduction. So not only water quality, but runoff reduction as well. So that will be considered in the calculations at the LDP as well.
Good.
There's no other questions related to that comment. Yeah, I'm going to call you, sir. Yeah, okay. Mr. Ed Malcolm?
Yeah.
My name's Ed Malcolm. I live in the same subdivision, Providence of Atlanta National, and my home is actually the house that the water ran off into. So
Could you just state the address for us, please, just for the record?
Say
Could you
again?
state the address for us?
Yes, 360 Lake Bend Court.
Thank you.
When they did the roundabout was the first time we realized that there was this storm drainage underneath the road. So I was just going to just make the comment that it was a big deal, and they had to go back and change things to move it. And so I just thank you for bringing it up, Mr. Griffin. But it brought a whole lot more water through that storm drain. And even though you feel like the roundabout is further away, it's far away from our subdivision, the water found its way over there and came down, and this is even closer. So, yeah, so that was just wanted to bring it up early before it becomes a problem and we have to redo things.
All right, any other public comment?
That's all we have for cards.
Okay. Discussion amongst us? Anybody have any comments or, all right, Laura?
Yeah. I have a list. Couple concerns. So why I was asking the questions on those lots is, trying to think down the road when you're in the construction phase of this. Concerns would be due to the sloping of the lots, like for 3 and 2, they're relatively small for the size of the house. Issues that you always run into are when people purchase these homes, they want to put a pool back there, and that's not going to be able to happen. And then you go into zoning variances and end up at BCA. And it just turns ugly. So those lots to me are problematic. I'm very concerned with the buffer space between the lots, 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. I think there is just no buffer there. I think that's problematic. The detention pond, definitely, I would make that more of a landscaped, not just a pond. I mean, in this part of the area, it should be some sort of natural vegetation that looks good, not just throw a pond back there, but, and that might help some of the drainage issues that those folks are having. But to me, it's you're cramming a lot of homes on a small area. I can see 3 homes on that, and no need for a private road. Do more of a natural looking road, which is what Milton is about, and maybe do more gravel that's porous, allows for drainage, those sort of things. Curb cuts are always problematic when we're in that area. So just my comments.
I will address one of your concerns about the driveways being close together between like 2 and 1 and 4 and 5. Per our code, driveways can go up to the property line. It's the setbacks are just for buildings. So just wanted to let you know that technically it is in compliance with our ordinance. So
The driveways are included, or
they're excluded
5
from
feet
the
to
setback.
25 feet starts at the side of the driveway?
No, the 25 feet is at the property line, but I'm saying that driveways can go up to the basically on the property line. So there is no requirement to set driveways back a certain dimension. So it can be like it is depicted here, where they're very close to each other, joining close to each other at the common property line.
Okay, so Mara's point then could be
Yeah, I mean, technically you could have a shared driveway if you wanted to and do a cross easement, but,
bothered me too.
so.
The house can't be within the 25-foot building setback line, but the drive.
And I would make a comment, I know, about having larger lots. The applicant had originally come in with 4 3-acre lots, but after some thorough surveying of the property, it was determined that he didn't have quite 12 acres, and that's why it's like a ½ acre less, based upon all of the right-of-way acquisition, preparing for the roundabout. And so that's why actually some of the lots are a bit larger than our typical 1 acre. Some of them are, over 2 acres. But that was a discussion that staff had with the applicant to do the larger lots. So
I would like what Laura said. By the development that look at driveways further apart. We don't want them parallel.
Comment on top of that would be what happens with that close is somebody comes in and says, I want to extend and do another garage. I mean, that happens all the time. The problem is you're so smashed up, you got no room. I mean, so it's design issues down the road. It might look great now, but down the road, when people are really living in it, are they really going to be able to live in it like that? That's the question.
Anybody else have any questions, comments? We're good. Again, I want to be sure that we do capture some of those, especially the applicant agreeing to the 15 to 25 feet between drives and all of that, I think. But the big one is the stormwater. I agree that this, they should take care of that. So, and again, we never see this again, correct? The way it goes to community development and then.
Correct. You wouldn't see anything after this point. Correct.
Okay. I think that's problematic, but there's not much we can do. All right, and we do not vote on preliminary plots, right?
I'm sorry, what?
We vote on preliminary plots?
You're in a position to make recommendations. I think the way it has kind of typically gone is the motion is to pass along the comments made during the session. If there's any particular issue if there's a kind of disagreement and I don't know what that would be really. I mean, your college kind of passing comments, but a motion to pass along the commission's comments during the hearing would be the most appropriate from what I've seen, the way it's proceeded.
Okay.
Because you're not approving, it's not your purview to approve or deny or to make changes. It's like you're just making comments and recommendations to the community development director.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion if anybody has one.
So I guess I have a point of clarification. So can you suggest conditions for plats?
It would just be a comment. The applicant is really only obligated to do what the code says, and the director doesn't have an ability to add additional conditions on any approval. They just say it meets the conditions or it doesn't meet it meets the requirements of the code or it doesn't meet the requirements of the code. But it gives them something to think about and talk about.
Thank you.
Make a motion that we move forward, approve to move forward on the Providence Road with stations.
We need to outline those, or are we good at that, or capture those?
I thought,
I think we've
I
got
think
it.
got
We got
that. It will just need a second and a vote in discussion if there's any.
Second.
Got a motion by Fred, seconded by Ron. Any other discussion, any other comments that we want to make before we go to a vote? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous, 7-0.
Okay. So now we'll transition back to training. So appreciate your flexibility here. So-
Fair enough. Just a quick comment on the preliminary plots. It gets difficult. We've had a couple of these where by recommending approval doesn't mean we agree with them, right? It means that they pass the city's requirements. And sometimes that plays different audiences, but we can't approve. We're just recommending approval because based upon what the city has laid out.
There we go. Got it. There we go. Wow, you'd think I knew how to do this. A lot of lucky guessing. All right. We talked a little bit about procedures and procedural matters. What I wanted to do is move into a little bit about the standards that you are applying when you make your decision. There's a couple of different sets of standards for the different types of decisions that you make. One big one that most people will think about is as to what this commission does is it handles rezonings. And what the code sets out 7 specific areas or criteria or standards that you're to look at when you make your recommendations. And again, since you're making a recommendation, you're not basing a decision on these particular standards, but what you're doing is you are looking at these standards and criteria in order to base your recommendation to the city council. And I'm just going to quickly kick through them because you can see them. And they're standard, and many of you have dealt with them before, and you've probably heard of them if you deal with this area much at all. But will the proposal permit a use that's suitable in view of the adjacent properties? Is it an appropriate change given what's surrounding it? Will it affect the usability of the adjacent or nearby properties? Pretty much the same standard. It's still the impact to the neighbors surrounding. Whether the property to be affected by the zoning proposal has a reasonable economic use as currently zoned. And that basically says, if you've got an agricultural property surrounded by office buildings, can you really say that someone can make use of this vacant agricultural property where all they can do is, well, if we get that case, we'll argue there's plenty they can do, but you look at to see, does the code allow them to do something to make reasonable use of that property? Whether the zoning proposal will result in a use which would cause a burden on streets, transportation facilities, utilities, and schools. Basically, what's the public impact, not just to the neighbors surrounding, but is there an impact to the general public from if you to recommend approval of the zoning proposal? Is it in conformity with the policies and intent of the land use plan? Now, sometimes you'll hear it doesn't match the concept plan. It doesn't match the city's requirements. City doesn't have an absolute requirement that it match. This is a factor that's to be considered. So if the 2020 comprehensive plan says this should be commercial and they're looking to go more industrial as opposed to commercial, they can propose that. It can get approved, but it's one of the factors that you look at, say, the city had a plan going forward. We should probably try to see if we're keeping in line with it, but you're not bound by it. Absolutely. A few jurisdictions do that. I know just off the top of my head, I know Barrow County, I think City of Atlanta may still do that. Whether there are other existing changing conditions that support or oppose the proposal. And that's just kind of a general catch-all. If there's any factor that isn't captured in any of the first five. And look at environment, whether the proposed use would have an environmental impact. So those are things that you look at. And if for some reason you were to recommend denial, it should theoretically be based on the failure to comply with one of these standards or criteria, one or more. For that matter. And then, and failing is probably a loaded word if it doesn't fully meet the intent of the standard, but it's not an absolute requirement that they do because they are just considerations and standards that are applied. You also hear things.
I just want to interject. Since we adopted our form-based code in 2012 and subsequently for crabapple and subsequently Deerfield area in 2013 and 14, we don't really have rezonings very often anymore. We do with use permits. You'll be hearing a use permit next month. But just wanted to let you know, they're coming far and few between nowadays. So, yeah.
Well, that's good. And that does happen oftentimes in cities where there's a lot more focus. They've already had the development over time, and it's a smaller area, whereas unincorporated county areas tend to have the more unused and vacant properties out there. So, yeah, use permits. Use permits are not a rezoning while there's both permission to allow a use of property. A rezoning gives you a whole bunch of uses that are potentially available. Use permits say, while this use may be allowed in general on commercial property, you have to get extra special permission for this particular uses, and those uses are listed in the code. And if they recognize that it's okay to do it on commercial property, but it may be inappropriate in certain commercial properties depending what's around or how big the lot is or various other factors. So they've got similar but additional standards that you apply in terms of whether or not to recommend approval. And again, you're a recommending body, recommend to the city council whether or not they should approve a proposed use permit. Robin, can you just give a list, and I didn't look this up, of examples of things that require use permits?
Sure. So a landscape business in AG1. We used to do a lot of those. We had, what you're going to see next month is alternative senior housing. So we've already had one a few years ago. A second one's coming up. Also, agricultural related event facility. So there's quite a few.
There's probably
About 20. Yeah,
Okay,
like
yeah.
20, something like that.
So those do come up, but they're just special consideration for uses that are appropriate in general, but need to be careful about the specific location that they go on agricultural or commercial or residential properties. And, the code sets out the standards to apply. And when these come up, hopefully they'll be presented to you maybe in the I don't know if the staff puts those out there, but we'll certainly make sure that we reference that there's some additional things to look at. And the good thing is effectively, they're the things that you're going to want to look at. Things like whether there's outdoor lighting, what the hours that they propose are, whether there's screening, location and number of street parking spaces, all of these things that the code asks you to look at before you approve a use permit.
And use permits are 12 months in duration, or what is the duration of use permit, or it's indefinite with the property?
The use, as far as how long they last?
Yeah, how long?
So the regular use permits that you would see, they are in perpetuity with the land. So.
And the property sold, it stays with the land. So, and the concept is you're looking at it saying, this is an appropriate place to do this. The land may change around it, but they've gone in and made the changes theoretically before any of those, before the surrounding areas may change. So the rationale and the reason for approving it should remain from what the original was, because that's when it was approved. Occasionally, and this is probably going to be perhaps even less occasionally for this body, typically variances go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. However, there is a provision where if an applicant comes in with a proposal for a rezoning and they want to include with it some variances, perhaps to setbacks, propose a new subdivision, with different setbacks for each of the lots, they would present their variances with that rezoning rather than going one to the to the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals. There's a provision which allows them to be heard together in the same application. You just apply different standards, and it's still fairly similar, basically. But the idea is the relief wouldn't offend the spirit of the zoning ordinance, which is to say, the zoning ordinance covers all property within the city. So it can't encompass every specific situation that may come up. There may be examples of situations where application of these strict rules in the city zoning ordinance aren't necessarily appropriate in that case, and a relaxation of those rules might be appropriate on particular property because the nature of the property that's out there. In addition, you'd also have to show exceptional circumstances and situations based on the size, shape, and topography or other extraordinary circumstances or conditions on the property, and that they are not caused by the variance applicant. So what that says is you're not supposed to come in and just say, I want to do this. It's supposed to say, I have a hardship because of the nature of my property. Like I said, the code applies to all property, but I've got this special property that's different for some reason or special for some reason. That means application of the general rules doesn't make sense to my property. So you have to show that. And you can't come in and say, well, I built this barn real close to the property line, so I need to put the extension real close to the property line. That would, that's kind of their own making. Wouldn't cause detriment to the public good and surrounding properties. That's kind of the obvious one that that we always look at is what's going to be the impact on the neighbors. If it's going to have a significant impact, then they can't satisfy that requirement. And you note, I've got the "and" in red there. If you get a variance before you, they're supposed to meet all 4 of these criteria. So they must show the public health, safety, and welfare are secured. It's not a burden to the neighbors. There's extraordinary exceptional circumstances, and it meets with the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance.
Paul, can you speak to, I know sometimes this subject comes up about precedents, especially with variances.
Okay, sure. And this is much more, our question comes up a little bit more in variances I've seen, but, and I've had this, because you don't deal with variances much, I actually took that slide out of here, but yeah, that's fine. I have it for the BZA. No, that's fine. The general rule is property is unique under Georgia law. Almost every parcel is going to be different in a small context. I mean, you can design a perfectly similar or exactly the same outline and perimeter of a lot, such that it's, they're both 200 by 200 by 200 by 200, 90-degree angles each time, but still you got minor variances in the slope, or you've got a road that's just a little bit, it's one lot closer, and the intersection's just a little bit closer. So almost every property is unique. So you're applying the code to a particular piece of property, and it's just not ever going to be exactly the same as you would apply the exact same rules to this property over here, even if they're exactly the same shape and exactly the same size. So typically, you're not going to have an absolute requirement that this will create a situation where every 200 by 200 square property gets the right to a variance or a rezoning to whatever property. That said, I will say you should be aware of what you have done in the past. If all the relevant criteria are effectively the same, it's likely going to at least bring a challenge. And if you can't distinguish why this one is different from the other one, then there's a chance if the rationale is the same, I would suggest you may consider that likely the similar result would make sense to occur. I'm not going to say it has to occur. It's not because of precedent. It's just a factual situation that it would seem that the facts are going to you should reach the same conclusion based on the same set of facts. Any questions about that? I mean, I get that question a lot during meetings. A lot of times, like, 2 months ago, I think we did one really similar, but evaluate this one on its own standing and reach a result based on the case that's before you, and don't necessarily worry about what you did 2 or 3 months ago if it applies here. And minor things may have changed, or the economy may have changed, and now the financial hardship on a property owner may be different. All right, this is what you went through tonight, and this is a very different approach, and this is what you saw is not only are you just a recommending body, you're almost even less of a official action taken in reviewing preliminary plats. And I will say the general nature of the process that was adopted to bring preliminary plats before this commission was not really so much to get a applications. Largely, the concept is the public was seeing situations where they're, all of a sudden seeing bulldozers bulldozing the trees because they've gotten their land development permit. They got the preliminary plat, they got their land development permit. There was no notice. The public didn't see any of that happen. So they were surprised by it. They couldn't ask any questions. They couldn't identify to a property owner or developer that, hey, I've got this, drain that goes under the road, like you heard tonight, the slope to the detention, there isn't a slope to the detention pond from this one lot. It comes here, and if you grade, drastically, it's gonna drain into our pond. Now, the developer doesn't have to do, all they have to do is comply with the code. We can't enforce any more than the code requires, but in many situations, there will be, attempts to engender goodwill in the process, and they will say, okay, or put a small swale on the corner of that lot, and it'll solve a problem. And it just gives the public a chance to identify these things. And who knows, things like there's an old cemetery that nobody knew about, that someone may be aware of. That could literally change things if it needs to go on the code and the state rules say you can't, you obviously can't grade over a cemetery. So things like that can come up. But the idea is to get it out in the open. Community development director can take those. Most of the time, what the community development is to approve or not approve based on compliance with the city's development codes.
Well,
Yep.
you said over the years, this has been built upon because the public doesn't understand that. Tries for
Yes, you do.
it was a big misunderstanding. 50, 60. And leave here very first.
The options that I said is continue to identify at the opening of each hearing, and then as you go to make your motion on what you intend to do is to identify. Of course, we're not the approval body. We're not here to approve. The staff has already determined that the proposal meets the plan. It will go to the community development director for a final approval as to whether or not it's compliant with the city's codes, which you do, which Gilbert and Mr. Shaw have done in the past. And if, there's not much additional that can be done other than to take it away. And I don't think taking it away is.
Within,
Yeah.
making the recommendations, is there any way after, let's say, either denied one, that we then, next meeting, that you, let's say, for us, learning something, you did help us next time.
So you wouldn't see it if we denied it.
Yeah.
So if there are major issues with a subdivision, because we review it, the applicant submits it, it goes through all our different parts of our department, the fire marshal, stormwater. And again, this is at a preliminary plat, so they haven't done their full civil engineering of it. So, but to the best of our knowledge, it meets the codes, and we appreciate Ms. Birds for appointing. We don't bring anything to you unless we believe it meets all of the codes. So there really isn't a denial. It's more of a public participation process. And
Literally, the code section 50-91 says, after staff determines the application is complete and meets all of the requirements. So chances are it's not going to get necessarily denied, but hopefully some discussion takes place in the city and the neighbor's happy. But occasionally there may be things that they can do. And the city knows developers and they deal with the same people over and over again. And there's some benefit to having a discussion about what would like to be seen opposed to what they can require to be seen.
I would like to add as well that even though our meetings with the applicant have been preliminary in nature, meaning conceptual stages and that sort of thing, we have pretty in-depth conversations about their lots. So we are asking those questions, even though they don't show that from a civil drawing perspective at this meeting. But they are thinking about that. And our site engineer, Jerry Oberholzer, he sits and works with them as well. There needs to be some comfort that we have sort of had those conversations with them before it comes to you.
Well, Paul, what you were saying with the water here, I think some of the success was seeing the applicant and the residents out there with the plan open.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good.
This process is not what happens here, but what happens here and out there. And a lot of times you'll see the public is here to ask questions, not to provide particular feedback to y'all. It's really more to say, where's the driveway going to go? How many lots is it going to be?
And that's a fine line too, because we've also had a lot of direct, and we had some of that tonight, and we got to figure out how much we want to allow the direct question and answer to the applicant and the audience. 'Cause
And
that
I
can
will
get
say,
ugly
you
real-
don't, the zoning procedures law doesn't apply to it because it's not defined as a zoning decision, because you're just, it's the code, applying the code. B, your bylaw hearing on a preliminary plat. And it does typically get into, as I said, it's more of the public having questions and the applicant being the one who knows how to answer them. And yes, I mean, you can adopt bylaws and set a specific standard. I'm not going to push you too much on having leeway because of the intention that I understand is to engage this discussion to some extent. That is up to you now, Mr. Nolte, as the chairman, to consider how you want to do that. And I'm actually going to talk to staff and we'll probably get input from the commission about redoing the bylaws. I don't know when the last time they were.
It's been like 10 years. So
Yeah.
I think that was something that Paul and I had a email back and forth. I think one of the projects we should do early on to look at the bylaws, revisit them and update them.
And on that point too, and I thought about this before, in terms of like just the setup with the preliminary plat, is there anything that stops us from, let's say, having two podiums here so the applicant can still be up there while the, citizen comes up, asks their questions, instead of the back and forth going on back there, at least they're both kind of here. The applicant can hear the question, can make the answer, and it can kind of be a little bit more, obviously everybody's still at a podium and kind of
I
talking.
mean, I think we can encourage or instruct the applicant ahead of time just to stay up toward the podium so he doesn't have to go back and forth. I'm not so sure about adding a second podium, but I do think that that's a good point about having the applicant ready and available.
Even if there's smaller podiums or something like that, just in a situation when we have a preliminary plat. So that way it's almost like question can come from the citizen, the comment can come right back from the applicant, and everybody's right there,
But I think to Sumit's point, since these proceedings are broadcast, if you're at a microphone, the people, if it's from the
And I'm
audience.
not,
Yeah.
what I meant was that, they would go up to the microphone. I totally agree. It needs to be amplified so everybody can. I just from a technical, I'm not sure. I think we could get to the same end result by just having better instructions for the applicant and then just have.
One of the values to Sumit's idea is at least you get to exchange this way rather than back and forth. We've had some very emotional, it's really got kind of one-on-one in there. And if we could just keep that, the audience back there and get the two people talking, I think we could maybe head off a lot of the emotional or the unwanted communication, shall I say. Ready?
All right. I'm kicking through a couple of these. Because they exist, I don't know that you will see them appear before you. There are sign variance standards that are very different than typical variances. So just if they come up, we'll let you know that there's a specific criteria to. Variances are also different, and I did want to just show you. I think that may appear on plats that there is a 25-foot stream buffer, a state established. The city then adds another 25-foot, so up 50 feet on either side of a stream for an actual undisturbed buffer. And then there's another 25 feet beyond that where you can disturb it, but it's still a setback and you can't put any structures within that 75. So you'll hear the 25-foot state buffer, the 50-foot 50 undisturbed buffer, and the 75-foot setback. Talking about the hearings, does the planning commission have rules? Yes, you have bylaws. The current ones get circulated.
Yes, I've distributed them.
As I said, I've read through them, and I think we need to do some work on them. But yes, they're authorized to get a little bit of cleanup on them. If not, I mean, you all can go wholly different ways if you feel the need, but at least some cleanup to look at. All Article 5, Section 7 sets out the process for rezoning applications or use permit applications. I've highlighted in blue, there's actually time for a rebuttal by the opponent and another final statement by the applicant set out in there. That's not typically anything that I've seen. It's applicant and those in favor, then opposed, applicant gets a rebuttal, and that's typically the conclusion. And I think we need to clean that up a little bit to go. I like that process. I want to make sure it's clear that that's done. Anyway, it's pretty straightforward. You can ask questions after everyone's spoken. You can ask questions from anyone that spoke previously. You can ask questions of the applicant or staff. And of course, there's a motion. Should be, the chairman will close a public hearing. There's a motion. The second written in this code is there's a motion and a second, and then discussion. A lot of times there's kind of some, okay, where do we go from here? I'm wondering what we do with this this application. And I'm not going to be a stickler for it. I get that you want to kind of wrap your mind around what motion to make and then what to go forward. But if you're kind of talking about general concepts, we don't really have a move towards a focus on this particular application. And with the motion in place, you can still amend the motion, you can still withdraw the motion, but I try to push it towards a motion early in the process and then start discussion. Motion. Obviously, the process for getting a decision from the commission is a motion. As the second point, it's always desirable to put your motions in writing. If you have, you'll see the applications before they get here, and you'll have an idea of what may or may not want to do with a particular application. And there's nothing wrong with coming in prepared, particularly if you're going to have a lot of conditions you're probably going to want to consider. Having that written out ahead of time, just so you don't have to, for that matter, you can hand it to the chairman. If you say, here's the motion that I made, here it is. And then Kurt doesn't have to write everything down and then make sure that he heard you right. It works. There's going to be things that may be different. They may say they're going to do, they're going to move something back 50 feet. So you're not worried about that front buffer anymore. Or now you're worried about the rear buffer and you gotta add that in. Things can always change. There's no absolute requirement, but it just makes things clearer. And actually the minutes can actually almost take that. And if they've got it, they can scan it in into their file and use that. This consistency is kind of where it kind of goes to the not precedence, but consistence. It's kind of the word choice I like better. It's good to be consistent in your decisions, but just because you did one doesn't necessarily mean you have to do one the next time. The commissions and boards here, I like to generally avoid the so moved. Assume that you meant so moved the last thing that we heard. That's fine. It's never going to get called. If it's typically don't look for the chairman to be calling for a motion to do this, and then someone says so moved, so it doesn't come up that much. If the chairman just says I'll look for a motion, no one's going to say so moved because there's nothing no motion to so move. The wording for this body for rezonings, use permits, things that are going to the city council, I would like I would prefer that the motion says I recommend, or I make a motion that the planning commission recommend approval to the city council, or recommend denial, or recommend approval with conditions. I think that's the appropriate step that you're taking. So rather than, obviously you don't move that we approve it. You can't, so you're not going to just because you use the wrong wording, but to be clear for the public and be clear for the minutes, recommend or motion to recommend approval, motion to recommend denial. And then you can add in the application number is helpful. I move that with respect to rezoning case number, I don't remember your numerology, XYZ, that the Planning Commission recommend approval with the following 4 conditions. And read the conditions.
Can I just clarify, like when there's a concurrent variance, that you would make a motion and a vote separately?
Okay, well, here's what I'll say. You can do it either way. If you're going to recommend the whole thing, honestly, you can recommend approval of with the concurrent variance. I'm awfully fine if you do them both. If there's a practical reason that staff would like it, I don't have a problem with doing them separately. But I think unless you're particularly distinguishing them, then there's not really a need to do that, particularly with the recommendation of approval with the variance. If you want to recommend approval and without the variance, actually, I really don't have a problem if you do it that way. I will note when that comes up, if there's dispute about that, sometime or conditions, and this gets into the priority of motions. This goes a little bit to Robert's Rules of Procedure. If there's a motion on the table, the main motion will be approve or deny, approve with conditions, deny, or defer. Those are the basic things you can do. Say the approval, the motion is to approve with conditions, and there's 4 conditions. The discussion then proceeds. You talk about whether you like those conditions, whether you don't like things. Maybe there's a variance and the motion included the variance and you don't like the variance. There's a couple of things you can do if you don't like exactly what was presented. You can vote against it, just straight up vote against it. Say, I don't want it with the variance. So since the motion includes the variance, I'm going to vote against the motion. You can talk to them and you can consider making an amendment to say, I'd like to approve it, but I would like to make a motion to amend the main motion to not include approval of the variance. Then you'll discuss that small portion. Then you'll talk about just about the variance, basically. Then you'll vote on whether or not to amend the motion with respect to the variance or additional conditions or whatever it may be. So you vote. If that passes, you go back to the main motion. And if we go to our variance example, if the amendment to get rid of the variance is approved, you go back to the main motion. The main motion is now to approve without the variance. Another motion to amend could be made, or you vote on the main motion as amended, so without the variance. You can do the same thing with conditions if you want to 2 and 4. Then you vote on that. If it passes, you get rid of conditions 2 and 4 and vote on just 1 and 3. Alternatively, if the person that made the main motion wants to withdraw their motion and restate it, the second and the main mover can withdraw their motion and just restate it. If you don't want to go through that whole process, if it's clear there's a consensus that we want to just change what it is, technically the motion's on the floor. So rather than going through an amendment and 2 votes instead of 1, just the mover and the second will withdraw their motion in second, and then it gets restated and you just go forward. So there's vote against, amend, or get withdrawal of the motion.
And you do a good job keeping us straight on some of that. We've had some really convoluted things, and you've done a good job, so we appreciate that.
Yeah. And I will say well, this gets more, the accuracy of the motion is more in terms of the conditions. So typically that's where that'll come in. I'm going to talk about that. Conditions are a big part of this. I mean, the basic, rezoning from AG to residential, that's the general concept. Like, we're probably not as concerned about that as we are about how many lots, how far apart are they, how much landscaping are they going to do? Are they going to put in amenities? What type of amenities? Where, how wide are the roads? within the system. Where's the kiosk going to go? You know, all of those sort of things. There are rules, there are requirements, but you can impose additional requirements that aren't necessarily part of the code as it's written. To some extent, sky's the limit on what you can do. You can put any requirement that makes sense. However, the legal restriction, as it's stated, is that the condition is imposed in order to ameliorate the detrimental effects of what you're doing, of the rezoning or of the use permit. So you're not supposed to just say, well, hey, I wanted the road to be wider, and you know what? Now we've got a chance to grab some extra space for our road. We're going to require that you widen Crabapple right there. That's okay if the impact of this new subdivision is going to increase traffic on Crabapple, and you need to widen the road to take into account that increased traffic. But if it's, if it's not going to, if everything's going off of a different road, and it's not going to put any extra traffic, well, then it doesn't make sense. And you really shouldn't be imposing it just because you can. The concept is this may harm the neighbors or the public. Therefore, we're going to impose these additional conditions. We'll let you do it, but you got to do a few extra things that aren't necessarily in the code. So if that's why you're thinking, and most of the time that's what you're thinking. Aesthetics are perfectly valid rationale for conditions. The case law says you can look at conditions as part of, or look at aesthetics as part of your conditions and in your decisions. So, if putting in 100, even 5 unit subdivision, if they were looking to rezone, changes the character and the nature of the property, you could say, we'll let you do this, we'll let you go to a higher density, but we want you to impose certain landscaping requirements so that it looks nice.
Paul, would asking for a turn lane
Yeah,
fall under that?
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times that's a requirement.
Yeah, so I was gonna also say, staff we try to, when we have, we try to think through what would be appropriate conditions so that you're not struggling up at the dais or contemplating and whatever, not to say struggle, I guess that sounds negative, but we're here to try to make it as easy as possible, and obviously we can miss things. So I think, hopefully most of those conditions are already in there, especially like transportation. That's typically not the kind of thing you would do it's a transportation issue, but, yeah. And I think too, just as this said, you want to think about, is it enforceable? Because I think sometimes it's like, oh.
Wait, it says, put in pretty landscaping. Require that the applicant put in pretty landscaping. Staff can't really go out there and say, that's pretty, that's not pretty. The more detailed basically, can a code enforcement officer go out and say, I can tell you do not meet this requirement? You get into some gray areas where you can't be perfectly substantially similar to the existing structure. These are maybe some variance type of conditions. They come up a lot more in variances maybe, but the more detailed you can be, like, hey, I want 16 cryptomeria along the western property line, or then you get back off to evergreens with a year-round screening, and then you back up to, they start getting into a landscape plan approved by the city arborist. That's about as far as you can go with a general statement on what to do with landscaping. Ideally, I know y'all may not know which you want to put in what species. It would be perfectly acceptable for you to give them that detail, but you may not be the one to do that. And someone gets out there and it's a little bit more drainage than they anticipated, so one species is better than another one. But I just give those things, there's kind of a level, and at some point in time, it becomes impossible to say you put in a landscape plan that's compliant with that code that says, I want a reasonable landscape plan. You can't do something that says acceptable to the neighbors. You can have the landscape, the city's architect, city staff do something, but it's just not going to be enforceable because the city has no ability to make the neighbor agree to something that's reasonable. So to the extent anyone ever, I mean, it comes up once in a while where you're trying to make both sides happy, and they may agree out here, yeah, we'll show it to them, we'll make sure that they're on board with it, but that just really can't be one of the conditions. Hopefully they'll work together, but we can't impose that requirement as a veto by the neighbors on the property. We have to be the ones that have the ability to approve or not approve something.
But on a rezoning, let's say, for instance, you're shortening between property A and property B. These come up quite frequently when there's some structure, or it's the structure is getting, like, it was pre-Fulton County and now they've got to meet, the code, but it creates a strange situation. So you say, we just want view shed vegetation so that it does allow the neighbor to enjoy their property because the structure is close, but the neighbors agreed that it's okay as long as I put something there.
Yeah. Absolutely. You can take into account and impose you can take what the neighbor wants and make it a condition. And I
Okay, I just wanted to,
Yeah.
I was just trying to clarify that.
Yeah. And I'm sorry if they absolutely take into account what they say, but the wording shouldn't be subject to property A's approval. The condition itself should not read subject to the neighbor's approval. Absolutely, while during the public hearing, you can take into account what the public wants or the neighbor wants and say, well, the neighbor wants you to do this. I think that's reasonable. I'm going to make that a condition. So you have to set it back 30 feet and put in a row of evergreens. Yeah, if that's what the neighbor wants and you agree with them, you can impose that, absolutely. Or you can recommend imposing that. I'll say, try not to duplicate the requirements of the code. And a lot of times staff will say, already required, that there's no rule that says you can't do that, but it gets confusing if down the line, there's a zoning condition that is also the same thing as a code requirement. That means if they want to change something in the future, they would have to both get a variance to the code requirement and a zoning condition modification to the zoning condition, and they come from two different bodies. So there are potentially reasons to do it, but if you knew the code was about to change to 5 feet and but it hasn't yet, and you still want to keep 10 feet forever and ever, go and put that in, even if that's what the code says. But for the most part, I would recommend against doing anything that the code already says. As presented, approve with conditions, deny deferral. Decision by a majority vote of the members present. And that's interesting that it doesn't say present and voting. So if all 7 of you are here, 3 of you, like for example, on the minutes this evening, 3 of you had abstained, you would need theoretically had to be a 4-0 vote in order to pass. A 3-1 vote. Well, I'm sorry, members present, yeah, it still had to be 4 to 6. And 7 of you were here, 4 were needed to pass. Even if you voted 3-1, it theoretically wouldn't pass. I think we're going to try and get that changed in these minutes. It's up to you. You can have that system in place, but typically think members present and voting, just getting a majority of that is the typical way it's done.
Good question on that too. With the whole COVID thing, what is the current official line? If you're online, can you vote? Does your vote count? How about electronically? How does that work?
There is a limit that there's effectively no COVID exception for medical. The current emergency is an economic emergency as opposed to medical scientific emergency. So that doesn't apply. You can call in to participate. You cannot constitute a quorum. So you can participate, but
You don't count.
not right.
Okay, thanks.
And a tie vote constitutes a failed motion. In this situation, that means you need to come up with a new motion So if there's 6 of you here, a 3-3 vote, then that vote failed. And if you keep voting 3-3, I mean, we had that, was it this body that had maybe it was they eventually got one, but they kept having to try to work through a motion that wasn't 2 in favor and 2 opposed. Eventually they worked it out. If you get to that point, you may have to say, we need to defer till we odd number of people here. Anyway, something to think about. The only thing I'll say about minute masks, I don't know exactly the process, how soon they get to you, but do go through them if you have the chance and make sure that you believe what the minutes say is what happened. You can't your comment if you said it and it's in there. I mean, you can't say, I don't want the minutes to reflect that. You can't change your vote. You can't motion who made the second. But if there's something wrong, if you say, let staff know that there's something that you see. When you get to the approval of the minutes portion, I would ask that the motion be made to approve the minutes as presented by staff in our packet or something along that line. I'm assuming that they get to you in a packet, and that shows that there's something that we can look at in the minutes of the next meeting to go and say, okay, now I need to go look at the packet to see what the minutes said that they approved. So we have some reference to where these specific minutes you looked at. Because if there was a prior version that was sent out, 2 weeks ahead of time, theoretically, we might look at that and think, oh, was it that version or was it the version that's in the packet? So
I'm not that good. I don't do it.
okay.
That should be my New Year's resolution, to do minutes much quicker for.
But anyway, if you do.
But I do have a question for you. I call them action minutes because I only basically, years and years ago, we used to have more administrative staff and it was kind of almost verbatim, but it was kind of a summation of what happened throughout the discussion, because now that we're on video, we kind of changed over to what I call action minutes. So it's really just recording the vote and
Get back to me with like an example of I honestly don't see them. So I don't know what you're seeing.
Okay.
I could probably go online and
I'll give
pull
you one
them.
and we can talk
And
about
we'll just
it.
make sure that the only requirement is what meets the Open Meetings Act.
Right.
Like I said, it's appropriate to change anything if it doesn't reflect and if we've gotten to the point where you have something in your packet, you say, I move that we approve the minutes as presented, or the action minutes, however they're worded, as presented, with the exception that you vote on it. I don't think there's any issue. If we had a contentious board or commission and that there were factions and, clearly defined different parties that had party goals and were at each other's, and there's situations where this becomes relevant. But the basic idea is, remember, you're on video and you're presenting the city presenting as a city representative as you sit up here, and you want to make that good impression and show that you are working for the public benefit. I can say that. I don't ever see any problem with that. I've never seen a problem. I wouldn't worry. As I said, there's no, I would try to not engage in a discussion as much as possible. Maybe inevitable forth, but with a specific question in mind, such that there's a specific answer that they can engage discussion. Obviously, try not to get in. You may be opposed to what they're doing, and that does happen. And in your question, clearly showing the application, but be respectful. Don't try to engage it as an opportunity to show them up and prove why their decision is bad. You're just going to recommend something to the city council. They'll have the final decision. And B, whatever comes up again. And sometimes you can get concessions and conditions that you may not know about if depending on what the exact situation is. Technically, you're here conducting additional information that you need to make your decision, but really, as I said, it's not supposed to be a discussion, which means theoretically, when the public comes in, it's typically the public will come up and say, how many times can they do this? Or how many, it's really not supposed to be that way. The plat review process, a little bit more. And typically, those are going to be staff may be able to respond to, or myself. We try to avoid having as much of that as possible. You with information. That's the purpose of the public hearing, is to give you information to make your decision. So I would certainly, I mean, you don't have to pretend like you're not hearing them and go la, 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 la. But you may say, the option that a lot of times we say is, I appreciate the information you may have. And I mean, chances are, if it's a simple question, staff may say, it's 10 feet, what's the setback here? Little things like that. But just bear in mind not to go, kind of once you start answering one question, you'll answer 2 and then 3, and then it becomes a full-on discussion. So just be cautious and wary of it. And I think one of the last, reach out to staff if you have any questions about any aspects of the development. The information's online, and staff's able to help you with anything. There's kind of outs to it. This slide really more gets into the, don't get into it engaged. I've seen this happen where the members, while they won't attack each other, they will ask pointed questions which make clear their opinion of the opinion of another member. If you have an opinion, that's fine. If you disagree with what someone else said, that's fine. But try not to make it into a attempt to make someone else look bad or good. Just go forward with your business. And again, I have never seen a problem with that. Certainly out of this commission. And the ethics and code of conflict are pretty clear. I mean, there is a state code. The city has similar requirements, but a lot of this stuff won't really have any bearing on showing up here and rendering decisions, because the biggest important things, it's effectively exactly what this is. Says if you have a property interest in any real property affected by a rezoning, and that means if you not just is it your property, but if you own the parcel adjacent to the property, I would say you have a conflict of interest. 2 parcels probably still have a conflict of interest if it's a rezoning. If you have any questions, again, you can certainly feel free to reach out. It applies to you, a business that you have a financial interest in, and actually a member of your family. Doesn't necessarily define family. A cousin, maybe not as important as husband or wife, or child even. So just, if you have any questions, say, I do have a conflict. What do you do next? Well, let staff or myself know ahead of time, just so they're aware of what's going to happen. It's not a requirement, but it's nice to know. When the agenda item is called, say, Mr. Chairman, before we proceed, you should step down from the dais. You don't have to leave the room, but I would like you to step down from the dais rather than just kind of sitting back and doing it. It just gives the perception that you are not kicking anyone under the table. You're not head specifically or pushing anything. And as soon as in any way leading up to the hearing, there probably shouldn't be, but certainly even before the actual hearing, you shouldn't engage in any discussions.
I've seen on council where they've actually gone and sat in the conference room here.
That's
Prove themselves all together.
I mean, it may be easier for you rather than sitting out in the crowd. Yeah, so that is a very convenient aspect to have that room over there. These examples are more. That's pretty much it for what I had intended for this evening. And again, as I said, if there's anything that we don't get to tonight, you think of after you've taken a look at this, or you just pops into your head.
Planning Commission. There were times when individuals on the planning committee wanted to speak to that guy is, I'm here representing myself, such and such.
No, that 100%, if you do, you should clearly express that. I would say from the city's attorney's office, it is easier if there's no appearance of any, appearance of impropriety, appearance of influence, yeah. But you have your rights as a citizen, resident to express your personal opinion. Yes, do clearly indicate that. But it's just easier for there not to be something to defend later on. If you have a friend who, yeah. Okay, well, very good. As I said, we're going to probably try to get you the bylaws in the next month or two, next meeting or the meeting after that. And if you have any comments or questions, we'll talk about a process that usually what we like to do is get a draft to you to look at, come back to the next meeting, to get your comments and questions, and then the meeting after that have a final version. So it usually takes a few meetings to get through it if we do that. But in the meantime, any questions? And I'm happy to.
I'd like to say, sitting here for, this is fantastic.
Okay, well,
The new members all sound new, believe me. A lot of questions. I've been, as I say, sitting here on. Never have we had.
right. Yeah, we get to it every now and then, and this, we haven't been a part of this commission as much, so maybe the times that we do it for other boards, just didn't have anybody here at the time, so, good. All right. Yeah.
And maybe this is for Robert. Because of the open meeting law. Because of the open meeting laws, we cannot have more than 3 of us gathered at one time. So there is an upcoming meeting in an adjacent jurisdiction that I am interested in attending, but how do I procedurally go about letting folks know I plan to attend? 2 of you can join me, but not 3.
There are exceptions. Some of the exceptions are for if they're engaging your legislator. I don't know that, I'm not sure if that's an exception. As I said, technically, the rule is you just can't conduct a business at a meeting in which 4, well, a majority are present, a quorum is present.
So if 4 of us wanted to go to an Alpharetta City Planning Commission meeting to just observe, is it because that's already a public meeting, it's okay, or is it because we aren't conducting business? We're just
The open, I was trying to figure, I would like it not to ever be an issue. You would not, if you do not conduct a meeting, you're not violating the Open Meetings Act. The issue is the perception of something happening such that someone could file a lawsuit saying, hey, here's a picture of the 4 of them sitting at the Alpharetta meeting where they're conducting business, obviously. Well, we just have to have you go up and testify and say, no, I didn't. But, if
You're not to have the question raised.
Yeah.
So procedurally, how would we go about saying the 3 of, I want to go Do others want to go? How do we make sure there's not four of us going?
We just check, I mean, whoever has an interest, check individually with each other and,
I mean, maybe,
and yeah,
it's a
you can
pretty
certainly-
big space. I mean, you
Yeah.
could sit
I mean,
separately and
yeah.
then nobody would ever know that. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't even make that assumption if you were sitting in next, different parts of the
Yeah, I mean, the
auditorium.
less, it's really just a matter of degrees. Don't go there, sit together and loudly conduct business and talk about the upcoming agenda for the city planning commission. Sure, don't do that. Don't sit together. Don't even show up, I mean, there's various levels that you can do. I would just, take whatever precautions are necessary without absolutely preventing you from engaging in a civic function that you may want to. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to be absolutely clear and make sure that four of you don't show up, say, hey, I'm planning on going, just if there's more than three of us, we may want to just make sure we don't sit together. If that's a specific instance.
And if that's the venue that you're at, and if you're going to participate, I would also, make sure that you don't identify yourself as a planning commissioner in the city of Milton, because you're representing yourself as a resident and not, maybe construe that, that you're going and representing the city or whatever, so.
So, but if you did go, as long as I have I have a business in the city of Alpharetta, I'm free to talk because it's on behalf of my business. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anybody else have questions for Paul? Great, thank you, Paul. This is very good. And I think one of the things we want to do going forward is having a number of these training sessions. It'll come up with a list of topics that we want.
Right,
And I know one that brought up was the whole transfer development rights. Where are we on that? What does that really mean? Just so that we can get a better knowledge base, we can make better decisions and have better.
If y'all come up with a series of questions you want to gather up, and every quarter I can address a few, we can do it that way, or whatever you want.
Right. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about, or is it, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by Commissioner Judy. I got it all. And then seconded by Smeet. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
And the plastic full